Chani, a native freeman woman, explains that the outsiders who have come to her planet Arrakis, which is known as Dune, have treated her people cruelly, and they have colonized the planet to control the spice, which gives them immense wealth and enables them to travel through time. A group of freemen attacked the spice harvesters before they were beaten back, and she says that the Harkonnen family had come to the planet before she was born, and spice had made the family even wealthier than the Emperor. While the freemen have been unable to repel the outsiders, the Harkonnens and their people left by order of the Emperor, and she asks why the Emperor gave this order, wondering who the next oppressors will be. Paul awakens on Caladan, which is the homeworld of House Atreides. He eats with his mother, Lady Jessica, who is a member of the Bene Gesserit. The Bene Gesserit is a social, religious, and political order, whose members train their bodies and minds to obtain abilities that can seem magical to outsiders. He tries to use his voice skill, which is a Bene Gesserit skill, but he fails to do it, and she tells him that such skills take years to learn. She asks him if he has more dreams, and although we see that he's dreamt of Chani, he lies and says no. He studies the Freeman language and the planet of Arrakis, which is hot and plagued by powerful sandstorms. Only the native tribes who known as the Freemen have adapted well enough to survive on their own, and they share the deep regions of the desert with giant sandworms, which they call Shai Hulud. Long exposure to spice has caused the blue eyes of the Freemen. The Freemen are considered dangerous, and their attacks make spice harvesting very difficult. They believe that spice is a sacred hallucinogen, which preserves life and has many health benefits. The Imperium uses the substance to help navigators of the Spacing Guild to navigate through safe paths between the stars. And without spice, interstellar travel would be impossible, making spice the most valuable substance in the universe. Paul and his father Duke Leto welcome the Herald of the Change, who has arrived with members of the Imperial Court, representatives of the Spacing Guild, and a sister of the Bene Gesserit, to relay orders from the Emperor that the family will take control of Arrakis. His father accepts the order on behalf of the family. On the next day, he meets with Duncan, who is the swordmaster of House Atreides, and he asks Duncan to go with him when he goes to Arrakis with an advanced team. He declines, saying he would be court-martialed. Paul tells him about his dreams about Arrakis with a mysterious Freeman girl, but Duncan was with the Freeman, and Paul saw him lying dead in battle. He still refuses to take Paul, not believing in his dreams. In the next day, Paul goes to see his father, and he requests to be allowed to go with Duncan to Arrakis. But his father refuses, telling him that he is the future of the house, and he will need him at his side when he arrives on Arrakis. He believes that the reason for taking Arrakis away from House Harkonnen and giving it to House Atreides, that the Emperor wants to set the stage for a war that will weaken both powerful houses and strengthen his own position of power. Paul says that he is afraid to be the leader of House Atreides someday, but his father says that he had such doubts when he was young, but that no matter what Paul chooses, he will still be his son. Duke Leto has sent Duncan with an advanced team to establish contact with the Freemen and forge an alliance against the Harkonnens. In the next day, Paul trains at sword fighting with Gurney Halleck, the weapons master of House Atreides, and they use a type of force field shield to prevent the blades from penetrating. Paul doesn't seem to take the training seriously, but Gurney warns him of what House Atreides will soon face. Because the Harkonnens were in control of Arrakis for 80 years, and the spice gave them immense wealth. But now, control of the spice has been taken from them. Gurney tells Paul that the Harkonnens are inhuman and brutal. On Gadi Prime, the homeworld of House Harkonnen, Beast Rabban, nephew of Baron Harkonnen, meets with his uncle to tell him that all of their ships have left Arrakis, and asks the Baron how they could let this happen, how the Emperor could take the planet from them and give it to House Atreides. The Baron says, mysteriously, that a gift is not always a gift. House Atreides is on the rise, and the Emperor is a dangerous and jealous man. Back on Caladan, Lady Jessica wakes her son, telling him to dress and follow her. When he's ready, she tells him that the Reverend Mother Gaius, her teacher at the Bene Gesserit school and now the truth's heir to the Emperor, is there and would like to meet him and learn about his dreams. Dr. Yu, the employee of House Atreides, checks Paul's vitals before the meeting with the Reverend Mother, and he whispers to him that when the Bene Gesserit claim to serve the greater good, they also serve their own designs. The doctor tells him to proceed with caution, and he says to Lady Jessica that Paul's heart is strong. Before taking Paul to meet the Reverend Mother, his mother talks to him in sign language to remember his training. The Reverend Mother says that Paul has defiance in his eyes just like his father, and she orders Lady Jessica to leave them alone. She tells her son that he must do anything the Reverend Mother tells him before hurrying out of the room. Paul is angry because the woman gives an order to his mother, but she uses her voice skill to draw him to her. She instructs him to place his hand in a box, as she holds a poison needle to his neck. If he takes his hand out of the box before she tells him, she will pierce him with the needle, killing him instantly. And she tells him his mother is outside and will let no guards enter. As the pain sets in, and he starts to groan aloud, the mother begins to recite the litany against fear outside the door. Finally he passes the test, and is allowed to take his hand from the box, but he sees that his hand is not injured. The Reverend Mother tells him that if he had been unable to resist his impulses like an animal, she had to kill him because he has inherited too much power. He says because he is the son of the Duke, but she corrects him and says because he is the son of Lady Jessica. She tells him that he has inherited more than one birthright, and she let Jessica back in. The Reverend Mother asks about his dreams, and Paul says he had one that night. In the dream, he saw a girl from Arrakis and says he's dreamt of her many times. The Reverend Mother asks him if he's ever had dreams that happened later just as they had in the dream. He answered not exactly, and she gets up to leave, telling him that she hopes he lives. As they walk out together, Lady Jessica asks the Reverend Mother if she had to go so far. But the Reverend Mother says that Jessica chose to train Paul in the way of the Bene Gesserit in defiance of their rules, so Paul had to be tested. The Reverend Mother laments that so much potential was wasted on a male. Although she had been instructed to bear a daughter, the Duke had led her to believe that she could give birth to the Kwisatz Haderach, a sort of messiah figure. The Reverend Mother says that if he is the chosen one, he has a long way to go. And the Reverend Mother tells Jessica that the Bene Gesserit has other prospects if Paul fails to live up to his promise. After they leave on a ship, the mother finds that Paul has overheard their conversation. He accuses the Bene Gesserit of steering the Imperium's politics from the shadows, but his mother tells him there's more than he expected. The Bene Gesserit has worked for generations to bring forth the One, a mind powerful enough to bridge space and time, the past and the future. She hints that they believe he may be that person, and Paul seems saddened that he's just part of a plan. After some days, Paul and his family leave Caladan and arrive on Arrakis, then they are greeted by cheers from Fremen onlookers. Paul sees Thufir Hawat, the Mentat of the family. Mentats are people who've been specially trained to mimic the cognitive and analytical ability of computers. He warns Paul not to trust the warm welcome by the Fremen, as Paul boards an ornithopter, which is an aircraft that flies with the use of insect-like wings. He asks his mother what the Fremen were shouting, and she says they were shouting Lisan al-Gaib, meaning voice from the outer world, their term for Messiah. And she says this shows the Bene Gesserit have been working on Arrakis to prepare the way, and that the natives have been waiting for centuries for the Lisan al-Gaib, and says they see the signs in Paul, but he says the Fremen merely see what they've been told to see. They fly to the city of Arrakeen, which is protected by a wall from the weather and the sandworms. Surveying the city, Duke Leto points out what he thinks are vulnerable points to Gurney, a spaceport and a spice refinery. He tells Gurney to guard them well, because if they can't refine spice and ship it off-world, they are finished. Lady Jessica interviews many candidates for a housekeeper, all of them Freemen. She noticed a woman has a knife, but the woman says it is a gift. She unsheathes the blade, and asks if Lady Jessica knows what it is. She says that it is a crysknife. When the woman asks if she knows its meaning, Lady Jessica signs to her guard to prepare for violence, before answering that the knife is a maker, one of the Freeman terms for the sandworms. The woman reacts dramatically, sheathing the knife and handing it to Jessica, confirming that it is indeed a tooth of Shai Hulud. While Paul is walking outside, he meets a man, who is watering date palm trees. The man explains that each tree drinks the water of 5 men each day. Paul asks if they should get rid of the trees, but the man says the trees are sacred. Alone in his room, Paul learns more about the planet of Arrakis, and the most dangerous organism on the planet is the sandworm, which can grow to over 400 meters in length. To avoid attracting sandworms, the freemen cross the desert using the sand walk, a special walk using an irregular rhythm that mimics the natural sounds of the desert. The scant plant life that exists on the planet is thanks to the freemen, who've cultivated several hardy plant species. Meanwhile, he notices a hunter-seeker, a tiny floating machine used by assassins. The device finds Paul, flying at him, but before it can reach him, he manages to stop it with Bene Gesserit's skill. As a servant enters the room, Paul grabs the device in his hand, destroying it, and says the operator of the hunter-seeker must be nearby. They find the assassin, who is now dead in the wall. He'd been cemented into a crevice in the wall weeks before, biding his time until he could send the hunter-seeker through a water pipe to kill Paul. Thufir claims to have failed to protect Paul, and offers his resignation, but the Duke refuses, ordering him to find the other spies. A Bene Gesserit sister meets with Baron Harkonnen and his mentat, Peiter de Vries. He asks what the message is from the Emperor. She tells him that the Emperor will strengthen Harkonnen's forces with his own elite military force, the Sardaukar, but nobody should know about it. Harkonnen says there are no satellites over Arrakis, and that the Atreides will die in the dark. The sister tells him that he may kill Duke Leto, but that he must allow Lady Jessica and Paul the dignity of exile. Harkonnen gives his word that he will not harm Lady Jessica or Paul. However, after she leaves, the Baron makes it clear to his mentat that he has no plans to let either the woman or her son live. It seems that the Baron is a very large man, and can float up into the air. At a strategy meeting, Thufir informs the Duke that he has gotten his hands on the Harkonnens' account books, and they were taking 10 billion Solaris, the currency of the Imperium, out of Arrakis each year. The group goes out to see the spice silos, which were sabotaged by the Harkonnens. Paul says there is supposed to be a judge of change to oversee and arbitrate the transition of Arrakis. Thufir says the Emperor appointed Dr. Kynes, an eccentric imperial ecologist, to this position. The Duke requests to see the harvesting fields, saying he'll take Kynes with him to ensure their safety. Duncan arrives and tells the Duke about his mission to find the Freemen, and how he lived with them at a community called a Sietch for 3 weeks. Duncan says he was close to being killed, and that the Freemen fight like demons. There are millions of Freemen on Arrakis, some located in tunnels below ground. Duncan has brought Stilgar, the leader of a Freeman tribe, to meet the Duke. After Leto greets him, Stilgar spits on the ground. The Duke and his guards take this as a sign of disrespect, until Duncan makes it clear that this is a sign of respect, that Stilgar is offering the gift of his body's moisture. He and his people respond in kind, and spitting on the ground. Stilgar tells them that they are outworlders, who take spice and give nothing in return. Leto says he knows the Freemen have suffered under the Harkonnens, but he will give them what is in his power to give. Stilgar asks only that they stay out of the desert, and don't seek out the Freemen Sietches or bother them, and to just take the spice and go. Leto says he cannot promise to stay out of the desert, but he will leave the Sietches alone. Stilgar says this is honorable and turns to leave. But Paul speaks up, asking him to stay. And Stilgar says he cannot stay, but says in his native tongue that he recognizes Paul, and he leaves. Thufir says that their plan is bearing fruit, but will take time. Duncan shows them some of the technology he's borrowed from the Freemen, including a para compass, which can tell direction despite magnetic interference from the planet's moons, which prevents a traditional compass from working correctly. Gurney jokes that Duncan has gone native, and Duncan admits that he admires the Freemen. Duke Leto and his people meet Dr. Kynes. The woman inspects the integrity of the still suits, explaining that the heat of the desert would kill them in less than 2 hours if they didn't have the suits. These special suits help to keep the wearer cool, while recycling the body's moisture lost through sweat, allowing the wearer to drink the recycled water. She is impressed at the way Paul is wearing the suit in a non-standard fashion, and she asks who taught him to do this, but he says it just felt like the right way. She says something in the native Freeman tongue, and Paul asks if she's a Freeman, and she says that she's been accepted by them. Kynes takes them to see the harvesting fields aboard 3 ornithopters, and she shows them one of the harvesting crawlers, while doing its job harvesting spice from the surface. She points out spotter aircraft on the lookout for worm sign, and it is a sand wave moving toward the crawler. Explains that worms travel deep, but get closer to the surface when they prepare to attack. The worms are attracted by noise and vibration, so it will try to attack the harvesters. Paul asks why they don't just shield the machines, but Kynes says shields are a death sentence in the desert, because they attract the worms and drive them into a killing frenzy. Duke Leto spots a sand wave, and Kynes calls out the sighting to another craft, explaining that they'll call for a carryall to retrieve the crawler, which will harvest Spice up until the last minute. The carryall arrives, but a malfunction prevents it from being able to lift the crawler. As it can't be lifted out, its crew is in danger. She says the crawler has a crew of about 21, and the Duke decides that each ornithopter will take 7 men from the crew. Paul noticed 3 men still there, and his father says he has an idea. With the others following his lead, they landing near the crawler, and he orders his men to throw out the generators, to make room and reduce weight. And he calls out over the radio for 7 men each to be put aboard the 3 thopters. Paul disembarks with some of the others, setting foot in the desert. The carryall disengages, and flies away as the worm nears. The crew of the crawler comes running out, and Paul directs some of them to his thopter, but he falls into a trance. The worm gets ever nearer, but before they leave, they realize that Paul isn't on the thopter. Paul is near the crawler, whispering to himself, and he is pulled from his daze when Gurney comes to retrieve him. They make a run for the thopter, but the worm starts to break the surface, causing the sand to shift and begin sinking in. Finally they make it to the thopter. They are watching from above. The sandworm swallows the crawler whole. Back at the base, Duke Leto warns Paul that he can't take such risks, and he apologized to him. They realize that the Harkonnens left them faulty equipment to ensure that they fail, but the doctor says the carryall was merely old. Paul is examined by Dr. Yu, and he says that spice is a psychoactive chemical, and Paul seems to be sensitive to it, but he'll be fine. The doctor leaves, and Paul tells his mother that what he experienced wasn't an allergic reaction, and he had a vision. The mother asks what he saw exactly. His vision was of Chani, the girl he's been seeing in his dreams for some time. He says the vision was confusing, that he also saw what he thought was his death, but it wasn't, and that a knife was important somehow. And he says that someone will hand him a blade, but he doesn't know when or where. Also he knows that his mother is pregnant, and she is shocked. She says he can't know that she only realized herself recently that she was pregnant. On the imperial planet Salusa Secundus, the Sardaukar prepare to depart. Peiter de Vries walks with a Sardaukar warrior, who assures him that the Sardaukar outnumber the Atreides forces. De Vries counters that the Atreides legions are well trained, some of the finest in the Imperium. The warrior clearly thinks the Sardaukar are superior, stating that those who oppose them find only death. Later, some guards hear a figure approaching. The figure shoots the guards before entering a room and lowering the base's shields. Duke Leto awakens and realizes something is wrong. While walking the halls, he noticed a fallen figure. Leto calls for security, but receives no response. He activates his body shield, turning the fallen figure over. But he finds a servant woman with a dagger in her chest. A poison dart comes out of the darkness, penetrating Leto's shield, and knocking him unconscious. The mysterious figure reveals himself. It's Dr. Yu. Gurney is awakened, and told that the shields are all down. He rushes outside, to find a large enemy ship hovering in the sky, and he gives orders for the Atreides forces, to get their own ships off the ground. There are explosions as the enemy forces begin bombing the base. Enemy transport ships land, disembarking soldiers. Gurney and his men engage in close-quarters combat with them. Elsewhere, a group of Atreides men is annihilated by Sardaukar. Leto is awake, but incapacitated, and the doctor tells him that he's made a deal with the Baron to turn over him, because the Harkonnens have his wife hostage. He slips Leto's ducal ring from his finger, saying he'll give it to Paul, and do all he can for the boy. He implants a false tooth in Leto's mouth, explains that if he bites down on it, it will fill the air with poison gas, and kill him. But if he picks the right time, it will also kill Baron Harkonnen. Outside, Harkonnen's army kill Atreides prisoners. But inside, Duncan takes on a few enemies, dispatching them easily. In the chaos, Paul and his mother have been kidnapped aboard a thopter. Their captors debate killing them. Duncan kills a few enemy soldiers before commandeering a thopter of his own. Paul attempts using the voice to manipulate one of the men to remove his mother's gag, but it doesn't work, and the man tells him to shut up. The Harkonnen men notice they've gone far enough into the desert, and they decide to throw Paul out of the thopter. As one of the men prepares to do that, Paul uses the voice again, instructing him to remove Lady Jessica's gag. And yes, it works this time. The man removes the gag, and she uses the voice to command him to kill one of his fellow Harkonnen soldiers, before moving to release her from her restraints. A third soldier tries to stop this, but she uses the voice on him, before killing him by herself. After killing the last soldier, she frees Paul. The thopter lands, but the Harkonnens manage to cripple the aircraft remotely. Paul and his mother climb a sandhill and see the city on fire in the distance. Duke Leto awakens in restraints, in the presence of Baron Harkonnen, while dining on a meal and a few of the Baron's guards. In the desert, Paul and his mother open a Fremkit, and it is a desert survival kit which they found on the thopter. Inside is a note from Dr. Yu, letting anyone who finds the Fremkit know that it contains an Atreides beacon. Dr. Yu is escorted to join the Baron and Duke Leto, and he says that he disabled the Atreides comms and lowered their shields. And he reminds the Baron about their deal, which means he must release his wife. The Baron floats over to Dr. Yu and tells him that he promised to set the doctor's wife free and that the doctor would join her. And he kills the doctor. Harkonnen tells the Duke that his family is dead and that his house has fallen. As Paul finds his father's ducal ring in the Fremkit, and Leto whispers something, so the Baron activates his shield to lean in to hear what he's saying. Leto bites down on the false tooth and blows out the poison gas in a cloud, killing several of Harkonnen's men, before the last ones alive manage to shut the door to the room. Men in protective suits enter the room, where Duke Leto let off the poison gas, and they find the Baron alive. Out in the desert, Paul and his mother take shelter under a tent found in the Fremkit, and he has another vision of Chani. In the vision, the Freeman girl is watching a great battle, which Paul was clad in a full-body suit as a participant. Lady Jessica asks him what else he sees in the vision. He becomes agitated as he tells her that he sees a holy war spreading across the universe. Like an unquenchable fire, a war of religion fought under the Atreides banner, and in Paul's name. Lady Jessica tries to calm him, but he is angry, telling her that the Bene Gesserit made him a freak, and he allows her to embrace him, saying he knows that his father is dead. They notice the Atreides beacon sounds regularly, so they leave the tent together, which has been covered in sand. Paul sees a Muad'Dib, a desert mouse, running away, and he helps his mother climb out of the hole in the sand. Just then, a thopter comes roaring overhead before landing. It's Duncan, who has followed the beacon. Dr. Kynes is also aboard, and Duncan tells them that the Harkonnens hit every population center on the planet at once, and the Harkonnen forces were bolstered by the Sardaukar. Lady Jessica says, this means the Emperor has taken the side of the Harkonnens. They arrive at their destination, where they need to take cover from an oncoming sandstorm. The site is the location of an old ecological testing station. Long ago, the harsh Araki's climate was meant to be tamed, and the water locked beneath the sands freed. Work had begun to transform Arrakis into a paradise, but after discovering the spice, nobody wanted the desert to go away. Paul tells Dr. Kynes that the great houses fear precisely what just happened to the Atreides, and that the Sardaukar would pick them off one by one. Only together could they stand a chance against the Imperium. And he asks if she will testify that the Emperor moved against House Atreides. But she says that even if she were believed, it would only lead to general warfare between the great houses and the Emperor. Lady Jessica agrees, saying the result would be chaos. The enemy has found the station, and soldiers lower themselves down onto it. The battle commences between them and the Freeman guards. In the room where they converse with Kynes, Duncan hears fighting, and he gets the sword and opens the door to see a battle in the hall. Before he goes out into the hall, he salutes Paul and leaves. Paul tries to follow him, but the door is locked. Duncan fights bravely, but is vastly outnumbered, and he eventually falls. Kynes has a back way out, and urges Paul and his mother to follow her. In the hall, an injured Duncan is alive. He attacks the soldiers again, giving his friends a chance to escape before he finally dies. She tells Paul and Jessica to find a thopter and take off. They find a small thopter and escape on it. Dr. Kynes plants a thumper in the sand. The device beats the sand, so the vibrations will attract the sandworm. She has 2 hooks ready, and it's apparent that she means to attempt to ride the sandworm. As the worm nears, Kynes is stabbed from behind by Sardaukar soldiers. As the soldiers ready to execute her, Kynes bangs on the ground, and the sandworm arrives, swallowing all of them from below. Paul and Lady Jessica flee toward the sandstorm, with enemy thopters in pursuit. Missiles are fired at them, but Paul flies directly into the storm. The missiles follow, but are unable to stay locked onto their target, and explode harmlessly. As the storm starts doing serious damage to their thopter, Jessica recites the litany against fear. Beast Rabban goes to see his uncle Baron Harkonnen, and tells him that they chased Paul and Jessica, but the pair disappeared into a sandstorm. He assures his uncle that nothing could survive such a storm, and that they must be dead. His uncle orders him to inform Gady Prime to start selling spice reserves. They don't want the price to fall, because they need money to cover the expenditures of the attack on Arrakis. Rabban asks what to do with the Freemen. The Baron tells him to kill them all. Paul and Jessica make it out of the sandstorm in their damaged thopter. The wings begin falling off and they make a crash landing. They get out and run for some rocks. They find some and put on still suits. But a sandworm passes near, and the duo set out over the rocks to look for the Freemen. When they stop to rest, Paul has another vision of Chani. In the vision, she tells him that he'll need to face his fears, and he also sees another Freeman in the vision, who tells him that he has much to learn. Paul and Jessica continue walking, searching for the Sietch, where Duncan lived for a while, using a para compass to guide them. Jessica sees greenery in the distance, and Paul says that means Freemen live there. But he says they must wait until after dark to cross the sands, because it is the worm territory. He tells her about the sand walk, the way the Freemen have of crossing the desert to avoid attracting worms. As they sit atop a sand dune, they see a sand wave, which means worms are near. They continue walking, and things are fine, until they step on drum sand, which make a loud noise when people walk over it. And yes, the worm heads in their direction, and they run. They watch the huge sandworm lifts itself out of the sand. There is a tense moment, until someone sets off a thumper. That attracts the sandworm's attention away from Paul and his mother. They climb atop some nearby rocks, and Jessica is relieved. Paul says that someone called the worm away. He senses something, and signs to Jessica that they are not alone, and they realize they are surrounded by Freemen. Stilgar is among them, and he tells them not to run, because they will only waste their body's water. Paul reminds Stilgar that they've met before. Stilgar tells his people that Paul is the boy that he told them before, and they can't touch him. The Freemen wonder if he can really be the Lisan al-Gaib. Jamies, a native Freeman guy, says that the boy looks like a weakling, but Stilgar counters that, because they made a brave crossing. But Lady Jessica is too old, and the Freemen attack. After a short scuffle, Jessica takes hold of Stilgar, putting a knife to his throat. Paul takes out a Maula pistol, a poison dart gun, and the Freemen back off. She takes the blade away from his throat, letting him go. Stilgar says the sun is about to rise, and that they must reach their Sietch, and says their fate will be decided there, and until then, they have his protection. Paul hears a voice, telling him that she would not have let him hurt her friends, and he turns to find Chani, the girl he's dreamt about is there. She tells him that some say he is the Mahdi, another term for the Messiah figure of Freeman legend, but to Chani, he looks like a little boy, and they join the others. Paul hands the weapon over, but Jamies speaks up, objecting to taking the strangers with them. Stilgar tells him that he's already spoken on the matter. Lady Jessica bested Stilgar in combat, and now, Jamies challenges her to a fight. Stilgar says Jamies cannot challenge a priestess. Although Stilgar warns Jamies not to do this, Jamies continues asking who will fight in her name, and asks where her champion is, and Paul steps forward. As they prepare for the fight, Chani says, although she doesn't believe that he is the Lisan al-Gaib, she wants him to die with honor, and she lends him a crysknife, given to her by her great-aunt. Paul recognizes it, and she tells him it will be a great honor to die holding it. The Freeman and Lady Jessica look on, as Paul and Jamies face each other. Paul gives the man the same salute that Duncan gave before his final battle. The two men fight. Paul quickly takes advantage, putting his blade to the man's throat, and asking if he yields. Stilgar says there is no yielding, and that one of them must die. Jamies fights ferociously, And again Paul winds up with his knife at the man's neck, but without killing him. Stilgar asks Jessica if her son is toying with his opponent, but she says that Paul has never killed a man. And finally, Paul deals a killing blow, and Stilgar says that Paul is one of them now. Lady Jessica insists that Paul needs to get off-world. Paul demurs, saying that his father came to Arrakis not for spice or riches, but for the strength of the Freeman people. The group heads into the desert, carrying the body of Jamies with them. Paul and Jessica stop, watching as a Freeman rides a sandworm using hooks. Chani tells Paul that this is only the beginning, and they continue onward. Thanks for watching, take care, and see you in the next video.
Back in my bag and I gotta brag, I do this shit for real. When we was down and we had nothing, we had to share a meal. We put the shit in overdrive with no steering wheel.